Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so I want to start by asking you to just picture the scenario, right?
I'm picturing it.
A lion, a fox, and a donkey decide to form a hunting party.
A classic trio.
Right, and they head out into the wilderness, pool their diverse talents, and they actually manage to bring down a massive amount of game. The hunt is this resounding success.
Oh, nice.
So the lion, sitting back, looks at the donkey and tells him to divide the spoils.
Which is a trap, obviously.
Totally. But the donkey doesn't know that. He's operating under the assumption that they are a team. So he takes his time, and he meticulously divides this massive pile of food into 3 perfectly equal portions.
Right, fairness and equity.
Exactly. He steps back, feeling pretty good about himself, and invites the lion to take his pick. And the lion, he doesn't even look at the food.
No, he wouldn't.
He is so viscerally insulted by this presumption of equality, this idea that a donkey and a lion deserve the same share, that he just lunges forward, snaps the donkey's neck, and tears him to pieces.
It's brutal. It's just so sudden.
So sudden. And then, standing over the bloody remains of their so-called partner, the lion turns to the fox and says, "You divide it."
And the fox is no idiot?
No, he is not. The fox steps up to the pile and he pushes almost every single piece of meat over to the lion's side, leaving only this microscopic, pathetic little morsel for himself.
Which is the smart move.
Right. And the lion smiles warmly. He says, "My dear friend, who taught you to divide things so perfectly." And the fox just points a trembling paw at the dead donkey and says, "I took a lesson from him."
It is a genuinely jarring story when you hear it without the childhood filter.
It really is.
It completely shatters that illusion of the neat, tidy moral universe we usually associate with these texts. Because, we have this culturally ingrained habit of viewing Aesop's fables through the lens of Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, cute talking animal.
Right, cute animals learning gentle lessons about, sharing or telling the truth. But when you actually read the source material, specifically the block we're looking at today, which is Fables 201 through 250, you realize you are not reading children's literature at all.
Not even close.
You are reading a brutal, razor-sharp survival manual.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written for adults navigating a highly dangerous, totally unforgiving world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is exactly the mission for our deep dive today. We're acting as guides here. We are taking these 50 ancient fables and basically ripping that talking animal facade right off of them.
Exactly, getting to the core of it.
We want to extract the underlying psychological mechanics, the practical wisdom, and honestly, the sometimes really uncomfortable truths about human nature that these stories were designed to transmit.
And they are very uncomfortable.
Yeah, they are. And if we're going to dive into human psychology, I feel like the most logical place to start is with the human condition's baseline operating system, which is discontent.
Discontent, yeah. That's the perfect starting point.
Yeah, right. I'm looking at a cluster of fables here, specifically 202, 203, 204, and 236. And they are entirely populated by creatures who are just staring at what someone else has, completely consumed by envy, and making catastrophic life decisions because of it.
They have the whole grass is greener illusion.
Exactly. Take Fables 202 and 204. We have a pack ass and a wild ass.
Beast of burden and a free roamer.
Right. So the wild ass is roaming the hills, totally free. He wanders down, sees the pack ass resting in the sun, and immediately starts taunting him.
Just gloating.
Yeah, bragging about his freedom, his lack of a master, how he eats whatever he wants. And he looks at the pack ass's sleek coat and well-fed stomach, but mocks the fact that the pack ass is essentially a slave.
Which is technically true.
Sure, but right in the middle of this gloating, the reality of the ecosystem just violently reasserts itself. A lion appears.
Enter the apex predator.
Right. The lion sees both animals, but ignores the pack ass entirely. Why? Because there's a human driver standing right there, holding a heavy wooden club.
A protector.
Exactly. And the wild ass. No master, no club, no protection. The lion runs him down and eats him instantly.
The juxtaposition there is brilliant because it addresses this cognitive blind spot that evolutionary psychology is actually still studying today.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, our brains are wired to notice contrast and novelty, particularly visual markers of status or freedom. So when the wild ass looks at the pack ass, or vice versa, when the pack ass looks at the wild ass's freedom, they're engaging in what psychologists call a focusing illusion.
A focusing illusion. Oh, yeah.
They lock onto the one highly visible benefit, the sleek coat or the open field, and they completely edit out the hidden structural costs required to maintain that benefit.
So they just see the perk and ignore the price tag.
Exactly. The core wisdom here is that perceived advantages always carry hidden structural costs. The complete freedom of the wild ass isn't just freedom, right? It is extreme vulnerability.
The price of having no master is having no protector.
Right. And conversely, the pack ass's heavy load and the beatings he endures are not just random cruelty, they are the transactional cost of the safety perimeter provided by that driver with the club.
I see that. But let's push this into human behavior, because Fable 203 takes this exact dynamic and applies it to our endless desire for a change of scenery.
Oh, the ass and his masters. This one is dark.
It really is. So we have an ass who works for a gardener, and he hates it. The food is terrible, the loads of vegetables are super heavy, the hours are long, so he literally prays to Jupiter for a new master.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. Jupiter grants the request and has him sold to a potter. But moving clay and pottery is exponentially heavier than moving vegetables.
It's backbreaking.
So the ass is miserable again. He begs Jupiter for another transfer. Jupiter, probably tired of the complaining at this point, has him sold to a tanner.
And that is the worst case scenario.
Right. When the ass arrives at the tannery and realizes what a tanner actually does, which is processing the dead skins of animals into leather, he falls into absolute despair.
He realizes his mistake.
Yeah, he realizes his old masters would have worked him hard, but this new master is literally waiting for him to die so he can harvest his skin.
It's a terrifying realization.
But when I read this, my mind immediately went to modern job hopping. You hate your boss, the culture is annoying, the commute is long, so you jump ship.
You think changing the scenery fixes the problem.
Yeah. You go to a new startup because they have cold brew on tap and unlimited PTO, but 6 months in, you realize the unlimited PTO is a trap because the workload demands 80-hour weeks, the founders are toxic, and suddenly you are desperately missing your old, annoying boss.
You change the external coordinates, but the fundamental misery not only remained, it escalated.
Exactly. But I have to ask you, is Aesop just telling us to settle? Is the takeaway really, shut up, take your beating from the gardener, and be grateful because you could end up at a tannery?
That is the natural modern objection for sure. Because we live in a culture obsessed with optimization, right?
Mm-hmm.
We always want the upgrade. But we have to look at the historical and human context of the agrarian world Aesop was actually observing.
Which was pretty bleak.
Incredibly bleak. In ancient Greece or Rome, changing your socioeconomic lot was incredibly rare and exceptionally dangerous. The margins for survival were razor thin.
Right.
If you were a laborer for a gardener, your life was brutal, backbreaking work. But the system was a known quantity. You knew how to survive it.
And the tanner was an unknown.
Worse than an unknown. When we read about the tanner, we have to understand how viscerally horrifying a tannery was in the ancient world. They were usually relegated to the outskirts of a city because the smell of rotting flesh, urine, and feces used in the tanning process was just intolerable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. For an animal to be sold to a tanner meant entering the literal underworld of the agrarian economy. It wasn't just a bad job, it was the end of the line. Death was imminent.
So Aesop is illustrating that transitioning out of your established ecosystem carries a massive risk.
Massive. And we see this explicitly in Fable 207, the crab and the fox.
Oh, right, the crab.
Yeah. The crab decides the seashore is boring or inadequate, so it crawls inland to a lush green meadow, and it looks like a huge upgrade. But a crab on a grassy plain has surrendered every single evolutionary advantage it possesses.
It's sitting duck.
Exactly. A fox spots it immediately and eats it. And the crab's dying realization is that it had absolutely no business leaving the environment it was adapted for.
So it's not necessarily never try to improve your life. It's more like stop assuming the meadow is safe just because the grass is green.
Precisely. If you were going to leave the gardener for the potter, you better have done your due diligence on what the potter's workload actually entails. The danger isn't ambition.
Right.
The danger is blind and envious ambition. We like because we're uncomfortable, not because we have accurately calculated the physics of the landing zone.
Which translates so aggressively into our 21st century realities. I mean, we don't have literal foxes waiting in the meadow, but we have a psychological equivalent that is just as predatory.
What's your modern fox?
I'm talking about social media and the massive machinery of FOMO. The fear of missing out.
Oh, absolutely.
Social media is the ultimate sleek coat without the heavy load. You scroll your feed, and you are bombarded with curated, hyper-filtered highlight reels. You see the massive house, the perfect vacation in Bali, the startup acquisition.
You're staring at the wild ass running free in the hills.
Exactly. But what the algorithm conveniently crops out is the crushing venture capital debt, the crumbling marriage, the chronic anxiety, the insomnia, all the hidden costs.
And Fable 236 captures this modern pathology perfectly, the rose and the amaranth.
Break that one down for us.
So they're growing side by side, and the amaranth looks at the rose and is just crippled with envy. "You are so beautiful," the amaranth says. "Your scent is incredible. Everyone stops to look at you. I am nothing compared to you."
Total inferiority complex.
Yeah. But the rose is deeply depressed. She looks back and says, "Are you blind? I bloom for a few days. My petals wither, they fall off, and I die. You are everlasting. Your flowers never fade."
Wow.
We are a culture obsessed with the rose. We envy the brief, spectacular bloom, the viral fame, the sudden spike in cryptocurrency, the fleeting youth. We crave that intense, localized validation.
And because we're so fixated on the bloom, we completely fail to value the amaranth in our own lives.
Exactly. The deep, decade-long friendships, the quiet stability of a reliable income, the enduring character traits that don't get likes on Instagram, but actually sustain a human life over 80 years.
The dopamine hit of the rose is highly addictive, isn't it?
It is. Whereas the steady serotonin of the amaranth is easily ignored. To break that addiction, you have to actively engage in what we might call a hidden cost audit.
A hidden cost audit. I like that. How does it work?
When you feel that visceral pang of jealousy, looking at a colleague who just got promoted to a C-suite role, you have to force your brain past the focusing illusion. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to take the beating from that specific driver?
Right. Am I willing to fly 200 days a year? Am I willing to miss my kids' soccer games? Am I willing to carry the baseline cortisol levels of managing a massive payroll?
Usually when you force yourself to tally up the heavy load, the sleek coat loses its hypnotic power.
That is a phenomenal practice because the obstacle here, the reason we resist this ancient wisdom is that modern hustle culture tells us we can have it all.
It's a toxic optimism.
Yeah, we're sold this idea that if you just grind hard enough, you get the rose that never dies, you get the wild ass's freedom with the pack ass's security. And Aesop is telling us that the universe just does not offer that package deal.
It connects directly to the Stoic concept of amor fati, loving one's fate.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Now, discernment is required here, of course. Modern psychology and human rights frameworks dictate that if you are in a genuinely abusive situation, a toxic relationship, a workplace that violates your boundaries, you must absolutely leave.
So Aesop's fatalism shouldn't be used to justify victimhood.
Correct. But amor fati is about recognizing what is fundamentally within your control and embracing the reality of the trade-offs you have chosen.
Right.
The pack-ass survived because he implicitly accepted the reality of his heavy load and the protection it bought him. Discontent is a poison when it is rooted in fantasy. If you spend your life staring over the fence at the greener grass, you stop watering your own lawn, and eventually the soil beneath your feet turns to dust.
That is a brutal transition into the second theme of our deep dive.
Right.
Because if discontent is the poison that comes from looking outward and misjudging the world, the fables in our next section deal with an even deadlier poison.
Looking inward.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when you look inward and completely misjudge yourself? We're moving into the mirrors of ego, hubris, flattery, and delusion. And I have to say, reading these fables is a deeply uncomfortable experience if you have ever had even a moment of inflated self-importance.
Oh, they spare no one.
Let's look at Fable 211, the ass carrying the image. A man needs to transport a sacred religious idol to a temple in the city, so he straps it to the back of his donkey.
Standard transport method.
Right. As they walk through the crowded streets, every single person they pass stops, falls to their knees, uncovers their head, and bows in deep reverence.
But they're bowing to the idol.
Right, but the donkey doesn't get that. The donkey looks around and thinks, wow, I always knew I was special, but this is incredible.
He thinks it's for him.
He becomes completely intoxicated by this perceived worship. His ego swells to the point where he decides he is far too important to be a beast of burden, so he stops dead in the middle of the road, plants his feet, and refuses to take another step. He expects the crowd to carry him.
Which is a terrible miscalculation.
Oh, absolutely. His driver walks up with a thick wooden club, smashes him across the back, and yells, "You dunderheaded idiot! Do you really think men are paying worship to a donkey?"
It's a tragic comedy, but it highlights a profound cognitive error. The donkey conflates the cargo with the carrier.
Conflates the cargo with the carrier.
Yeah. In sociology, there's a concept called the halo effect, where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their character. The donkey experiences a localized version of this. He assumes the reverence directed at the symbol he carries is actually a recognition of his inherent biological superiority.
And we see the catastrophic end result of that delusion in Fable 241, the wolf and his shadow.
Oh, this one is cinematic.
It really is. So a wolf is roaming across an empty plain right at sunset. The sun is incredibly low on the horizon. The wolf looks down, and because of the angle of the light, his shadow is stretched out over 50 feet long.
It's massive.
He stalks and stares at it. He is totally mesmerized. He looks at this massive, towering silhouette and says, I had no idea I was so huge. Look at the size of my head. Why in the world have I been hiding from the lion all these years? With a body this big, I should be the absolute king of the beasts.
He believes his own shadow.
He gets completely lost in this fantasy. He starts strutting around, puffing his chest out, admiring his fake optical illusion of a body, and he is so distracted by his shadow that he loses all situational awareness.
And we know what happens next.
While he's staring at the dirt, an actual lion springs out of the brush, pins him to the ground, and crushes his throat. The wolf's dying thought is, if I had not lost sight of the facts, I wouldn't have been ruined by my fancies.
That fable is a perfect allegory for the philosophical concept of hyperreality, which was coined by Jean Baudrillard.
Hyperreality.
Now, hyperreality is the condition in which what is real and what is fiction are seamlessly blended together so that there is no clear distinction for the conscious mind. The shadow is a simulacrum. It's a projection that has no mass, no teeth, no claws. But to the wolf's ego, the shadow becomes more real than his actual physical limitations.
So the core wisdom across both of these fables is that delusions of grandeur leave you entirely defenseless.
Entirely. True security in life requires a brutal, uncompromising self-honesty. The moment your ego detaches from the facts of your actual capabilities, you voluntarily surrender your defenses.
You surrender them, and that is exactly what happens in Fable 244, the wily lion and the bull.
Yes.
This one takes the delusion and shows how predators actively weaponize it through flattery.
It's manipulation 101.
Right. So a lion wants to eat a massive bull, but the bull is huge, and more importantly, he has these massive razor-sharp horns. The lion knows that in a fair fight, he might get gored to death, so he doesn't use force, he uses flattery.
The smart predator always does.
The lion approaches the bull acting like a sophisticated friend. He praises the bull's magnificent physique, his muscular shoulders, his elegant coat. He pumps the bull's ego up to the absolute maximum,
Softening him up.
Then, in an offhand way, the lion says, you know, you are such a refined, handsome creature. It's such a shame you have those ugly, barbaric horns sticking out of your head. They really ruin your aesthetic. You would look so much more dignified without them.
And the bull falls for it.
He does. The bull is so puffed up, so desperate to maintain this sophisticated image the lion just painted for him, that he actually agrees. He allows his horns to be cut off. And the second he is disarmed, the lion drops the friendly act and slaughters him.
In the ancient courts of kings and emperors, this dynamic was a literal matter of life and death. The ancients understood something we often forget, which is that flattery is rarely a compliment. It is usually an appraisal.
An appraisal, like sizing you up.
Exactly. A flatterer is assessing your weak points. They are testing how easily your ego can be manipulated to override your survival instincts. The bull's desire to be perceived as refined overrides his evolutionary need for a defense mechanism.
I want to translate this to today because I see this everywhere. The wolf in his shadow is the ultimate metaphor for our digital lives. I call this the shadow check.
Oh, I like that. The shadow check.
Yeah. How often do we look at our digital shadows, our follower counts, our LinkedIn connections, our viral tweets, and mistake them for our actual substance?
Constantly.
You see people build a massive shadow online. They have 100,000 followers. They look at that number, that sunset shadow, and they think, I am a genius. I'm untouchable. They start acting with immense arrogance in their real physical lives.
But a digital shadow can't fight a physical lion.
Exactly. The moment a real crisis hits a lawsuit, a health emergency, a deep interpersonal conflict, that follower count means absolutely nothing. The lion of reality eats them while they're busy checking their notifications.
And the ass carrying the image is arguably the most accurate description of modern corporate pathology I have ever heard. Borrowed authority is an absolute epidemic.
Explain that, borrowed authority.
Think about a high-level executive at a Fortune 500 company. They walk into a room and everyone falls silent. People laugh at their terrible jokes. Junior employees scramble to bring them coffee and agree with their most half-baked ideas.
Right, because they're the boss.
But over a decade, that executive's brain slowly rewires itself to believe that they are inherently brilliant, charismatic, and beloved.
They forget it's just the title.
Right. They are just the donkey carrying the idol of the corporation. The moment they retire or get laid off or the company goes under, the idol is taken off their back. And suddenly they walk into a room and no one cares.
The jokes aren't funny anymore.
Exactly. The phone stops ringing. The psychological collapse that happens to people who confuse the respect given to their title with respect given to their character, it is devastating.
So how do we prevent that collapse? We need a practical application here for the listener.
We do.
I think every listener needs to conduct a borrowed glory audit. You need to sit down with a piece of paper and list all the perks, the deference, the respect, and the influence you currently enjoy in your life.
Write it all out.
Then you have to be brutally, painfully honest. Which of those things belong strictly to your job title, your uniform, your bank account, or your family name?
The cargo, basically.
Right. If you were stripped of your job title tomorrow and dropped into a city where no one knew you, what is actually left? Who are you when the idol is removed? Would people still seek your advice? Would they still trust you?
If your entire self-esteem is resting on the cargo, you are setting yourself up for the stick.
Setting yourself up for the stick. Yeah.
It is a highly effective, if uncomfortable, audit. And the reason it is so uncomfortable, the real obstacle to growth here, is that modern culture explicitly demands that we project a massive shadow.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. That's the prevailing mantra of the 21st century. We are actively encouraged to inflate our egos. We're told to build personal brands that make us look bigger, richer, and more successful than we actually are.
Right.
If you tell a modern professional to acknowledge their smallness or admit their vulnerabilities, they will view it as career suicide. Society equates humility with weakness and limits with failure.
But wait, if I play devil's advocate here, isn't some level of delusion necessary?
How do you mean?
I mean, if Elon Musk or Steve Jobs accurately assessed the statistical probability of their success, they never would have started their companies. Doesn't a little bit of the wolf's shadow confidence actually drive innovation?
That is where discernment is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
You are touching on the psychology of self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy.
Yeah, the belief in one's capacity to execute a behavior. It's a necessary prerequisite for attempting hard things. The distinction Aesop is making is not against healthy ambition. It is against suicidal hubris.
Okay, there's a line.
Right. The wolf's fatal error wasn't that he believed he was a strong wolf. His error was believing his shadow made him capable of fighting a lion.
Ah, I see.
A visionary entrepreneur might believe they can disrupt an industry, which is a massive stretch, sure. But if they suddenly believe they don't need to do accounting, or they don't need to test their product, or they are immune to the laws of physics, that is when the lion eats them.
So we need the courage to stretch our limits, but we must retain the foundational humility to recognize that we actually have limits.
Precisely. Which brings to mind the deep comparative insight of Eastern philosophy here. This entire section reads like a primer on Buddhist thought regarding the illusion of the ego.
Really? How so?
Buddhism teaches that attachment to a false manufactured sense of self is the root of all human suffering. When the bull attaches his identity to the lion's flattery, this false image of being refined, he literally cuts off his own defenses.
He lets his ego destroy his biology.
Yes, freedom, in both Aesop's world and Eastern wisdom, comes from letting go of the inflated self-image. It's about embracing reality as it actually is without the distortion of pride.
But stripping away that false ego is a terrifying process. Because once you strip away the discontent of wanting what others have, and you strip away the delusion of thinking you are bigger than you are, we're left with something very raw. You are forced to look at the bedrock.
And that bedrock brings us to section 3, the anchor of nature.
We're moving into character, habit, and immutability. And I'm going to be entirely honest with you, this is the section of the deep dive that I fought against the hardest.
It's tough to swallow.
It is. Because these fables tackle the most terrifying question in human psychology. Can people actually change? Are we capable of fundamental transformation, or are we just running a pre-programmed script until we die?
What's fascinating here is how blunt the ancients were about this. Let's look at Fable 205, the ant.
Yeah.
It opens with this bizarre mythological origin story. It says that ants were originally men. They were farmers. But they were incredibly covetous. They were never satisfied with their own crops, so they constantly snuck into their neighbors' fields and stole the fruits of others' labor.
Just constant thievery.
Yeah. So Jupiter, watching this, gets furious at their inherent greed. As a punishment, he strips them of their humanity and transforms them into insects and to ants.
Okay, severe punishment.
But here is the gut punch of the fable. Though their physical forms were radically changed, their fundamental nature remained exactly the same.
Wow.
To this day, ants scurry around, gathering and stealing the fruits of others' labor. The moral of the story is explicitly written out. You may punish a thief, but his bent remains.
His bent remains. It's a dark conclusion. And Aesop doubles down on it in Fable 215, The Shepherd and the Wolf, right?
Yes, he does.
So a shepherd finds a tiny orphaned wolf cub. He decides to run an experiment in nurture over nature. He takes the cub home and raises it right alongside his sheepdogs.
A dangerous game.
The wolf grows up in the domestic environment. When wild wolves come down from the hills to steal sheep, the raised wolf runs with the dogs to chase them off. He acts exactly like a loyal dog.
For a while.
Right, for a while. But over time, a pattern emerges. Sometimes the dogs give up the chase and return to the flock. The raised wolf, however, keeps running. He catches up with the wild wolves, sits down with them, and shares in the feast of the stolen sheep.
His true nature kicks in.
Yeah. Then he trots back to the farm, wagging his tail, playing innocent. But eventually it gets worse. When there are no wild wolves around to blame, the domestic wolf simply starts slaughtering the sheep himself, secretly indulging his predatory nature.
He can't help it.
The shepherd finally catches him in the act, realizes the experiment has failed, and hangs the wolf from a tree. The moral is one of the most famous idioms we have. What's bred in the bone is sure to come out in the flesh.
It's deterministic for sure.
And I have to push back on this hard. Are we really saying that people are just biological robots?
Uh-huh.
I mean, if I am fundamentally a procrastinator, am I just doomed? If a teenager makes a terrible mistake and steals a car, are they forever a thief in their soul? The text seems to be arguing that all the nurturing in the world, raising a wolf in a loving home, or literally transforming a man into a different species, cannot overwrite the underlying operating system.
Right.
It feels incredibly fatalistic and, frankly, depressing.
Your reaction is exactly why we have to examine the historical context to understand why the ancients thought this way.
Okay, why did they?
The ancient world was governed by profound, unyielding determinism. They did not have the luxury of our modern belief in infinite malleability. Their entire existence was dictated by the unbending cycles of the seasons, the movement of the stars, and the harsh realities of biology.
So you plant wheat, you get wheat.
Exactly. A lion gives birth to a lion. Fable 237, The Ages of Man, beautifully illustrates this ancient search for a fixed biological pattern.
Oh, that's the one with the different animals giving man his years.
Right. It tells a myth where man is given his lifespan by different animals. The horse gives man his youth, which is why young men are high-mettled, energetic, and impatient. The ox gives man his middle age, which is why men in their prime are steady, enduring, and built for hard labor.
And the dog.
The dog gives man his old age, which is why the elderly can become peevish, defensive, and prone to snapping. They were observing universal patterns in human behavior and concluding that the die is cast early on. They believed that nature always, ultimately, trumps nurture.
But is there any truth to it today? Let's do the modern translation, because my initial reaction is to reject this entirely based on the modern growth mindset. But when I actually look at human behavior, I start to see Aesop's point.
Where do you see it?
I think this text is a direct assault on one of the most pervasive and dangerous fallacies of the 21st century. The I can change him or I can change her complex.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. How many people do you know who enter into romantic relationships with someone who displays massive, flashing red flags? The person is chronically dishonest or intensely selfish, or they treat service workers terribly.
But the partner thinks they can fix them.
Yeah. They think, yes, but they had a hard childhood. If I just love them enough, if we get a house together, we have a baby, that underlying nature will change. And Aesop is shouting across 2.5 millennia. The wolf might play with the dogs for a few years, but eventually the wolf is going to eat the sheep. The bent remains.
It is a devastating truth in relationships. But, it is equally true in complex organizational structures. Think about corporate culture.
Oh, give me an example.
A company is rocked by massive scandal, embezzlement, toxic workplace harassment, fraud. The board panics. They hire a PR firm, they change the company name, they redesign the logo, they put ping pong tables in the break room, and they write a glowing new mission statement about integrity and community.
But they don't fire the executives.
Right. They leave the exact same people in charge. What happens? 3 years later, they are back in the news for the exact same behavior. You can change the form of the organization, you can turn the men into ants. But if the leaders are fundamentally covetous, the ants are still going to steal.
Exactly. And it's not just about malice or greed, it's about our foundational, unshakable quirks.
I'm sure.
Look at Fable 2:16.
Remind me of that one.
Jupiter creates the lion. The lion is massive, armed with fangs and claws, the apex predator of the world. But the lion comes to Jupiter weeping because he has this paralyzing, irrational fear of a rooster crowing. He hates himself for being a coward.
The lion afraid of a rooster.
Yeah. And while the lion is complaining, an elephant walks by. The elephant is the size of a house, capable of uprooting trees, but the elephant is frantically flapping its ears, terrified out of its mind because a tiny gnat is buzzing around its head.
Right.
The lion realizes that even the mightiest creatures have ingrained, irrational vulnerabilities. No matter how much power or wealth we accumulate, no matter how much we dress ourselves up in adult sophistication, we all have these foundational fears and habits that we just cannot seem to logic our way out of.
So what do we do with this deeply uncomfortable realization? The practical how-to here requires a massive shift in how we allocate our energy.
What's the shift?
The reflection question you must ask yourself is, am I trying to teach a wolf to guard sheep? You need to stop expending massive amounts of emotional and psychological energy trying to work against your fundamental nature or the deeply ingrained nature of the people around you.
So leaning into reality.
Yes. If you know, based on 30 years of data, that you are a night owl whose brain only turns on at 9:00 p.m., stop trying to force yourself to be a 5:60 a.m. productivity guru just because a billionaire on a podcast told you to. Build systems that account for your reality, not an idealized fantasy.
That makes so much sense.
Or, if you are managing an employee who is fundamentally chaotic and disorganized, but possesses incredible out-of-the-box creative brilliance, stop putting them on a performance improvement plan for their filing skills.
Stop trying to make them an administrator.
Exactly. Put them in a sandbox where their chaotic nature is a massive asset, and pair them with an administrative dog who loves to organize. You have to work with the grain of the wood, not against it.
I love the idea of working with the grain. But the obstacle to growth here is that the self-help industry makes billions of dollars telling us there is no grain.
It really does. Modernity insists that we are entirely malleable.
Yeah, we're told we can rewire our brains, rewrite our personal narratives, and become completely different people in 30 days. We violently reject the idea of boundaries or inherent limitations. So Aesop's strict fatalism feels like it strips us of our agency. If I can't change my flaws, what is the point of trying?
This is exactly where we must apply rigorous discernment. We cannot adopt the ancient worldview wholesale. We must absolutely reject the idea that flawed people or those who have committed crimes are beyond rehabilitation.
We shouldn't just hang the wolf.
Right. We shouldn't just hang the wolf the moment it makes a mistake.
Yeah.
Modern neuroscience, specifically the concept of neuroplasticity, proves that the brain can form new neural pathways. Change is biologically possible.
Okay, good.
However, we must balance that with Hebb's law, which is neurons that fire together wire together. A habit you have engaged in for 20 years is a massive paved superhighway in your brain. A new positive habit is a tiny dirt path in the jungle.
That is a great analogy.
The enduring wisdom we must retain from Aesop is a profound respect for the gravity of habit and character. True change is not cheap. It is not achieved by reading one book or changing your scenery. It requires massive, structural, continuous, exhausting intervention.
So change is possible, but it's like defying gravity.
Exactly. The discernment is realizing that while you can change, your default nature has an incredible gravitational pull, and ignoring that pull or assuming change is easy is a recipe for disaster.
It's the difference between optimistic delusion and grounded hope. You can change, but you have to respect how incredibly hard it is, and you have to stop demanding that others change their fundamental nature just to make your life easier.
This anxiety about the immutability of character isn't just Greek, by the way. It's a universal human obsession.
Really?
Yeah, as a comparative insight, think of the global folktale of the scorpion and the frog. It exists in various forms across multiple cultures.
Oh, I know this one. The scorpion asks for a ride.
Right. The scorpion asks the frog for a ride across the river. The frog says, "Are you crazy? You'll sting me." And the scorpion uses logic. He says, if I sting you, you will sink and I will drown. It is not in my logical self-interest to sting you.
Which sounds completely reasonable.
The frog is convinced by the logic. They get halfway across the river, and the scorpion stings the frog. As the neurotoxin sets in and they're both sinking to their deaths, the frog asks, why? Now we both die. And the scorpion simply replies, I couldn't help it. It's my nature.
Chilling.
Humans have wrestled with this terrifying predictability for millennia. We are all desperately trying to figure out who is a frog and who is a scorpion before we let them on our backs.
And figuring out who is a scorpion becomes infinitely more critical when we step outside of our interpersonal relationships and into the wider systems of society. Which brings us to our final act.
Section 4.
Yes, Section 4, the architecture of power, justice, and consequence. So what does this all mean? We've looked at our internal discontent, our blinding ego, and our stubborn, fixed natures. Now, what happens when you take these flawed, envious, ego-driven, stubborn animals and force them to interact within the ruthless hierarchies of the external world?
It gets bloody.
It really does. Let's circle back to the fable I opened the show with, the lion, the fox, and the ass hunting together, Fable 249.
The divided spoils.
Right. The donkey assumed he was operating in a fair, egalitarian system. He divided the food into 3 equal parts. He assumed merit and effort dictated reward, and he was instantly murdered for his presumption.
Because he misread the system.
Exactly. The fox, watching this, experiences a rapid, terrifying education in realpolitik. When told to divide the food, the fox pushes 99% of it to the lion, keeping almost nothing for himself. He realizes that fairness is a construct. Leverage is reality.
It is arguably the most cynical fable in the entire collection, but it perfectly encapsulates the core wisdom of this section, which is power dynamics are entirely unforgiving, and fairness is often an illusion constructed by the weak.
That's a hard truth.
The world, at its macro level, does not operate on the rules of what is fair or just. It operates on the realities of leverage, force, and asymmetrical power.
And historically, the ancients accepted this as a brutal fact of physics. In the ancient Mediterranean world, might literally made right. There were no HR departments to complain to. There was no Geneva Convention. If you were a small, prosperous city-state located next to the expanding Roman or Spartan Empire, you had 2 choices. You paid crippling tribute, giving all the food to the lion, or you were slaughtered and sold into slavery.
And they didn't even expect justice from the divine.
No. Look at Fable 243, Mercury and the man bitten by an ant.
Tell that one.
A man is standing on the shore watching a ship sink in a storm. He shakes his fist at the heavens and complains that the gods are fundamentally unjust because they are drowning the good, innocent people on the ship right alongside the wicked.
A classic philosophical argument.
Right, the problem of evil. But while he is passionately arguing for justice, he steps on an anthill and a single ant bites his toe. He is so annoyed by the pain that he stomps his foot down, carelessly crushing hundreds of innocent ants.
The hypocrisy is immediate.
Yes. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, instantly appears, strikes the man with his staff, and says, "Are you really going to make yourself a judge of the gods when you treat those smaller than you exactly the same way?"
The ancients viewed power, even divine power, as arbitrary, hypocritical, and utterly self-justifying. You could not rely on the universe to be fair.
But this isn't just an artifact of ancient history. This is where the modern translation becomes incredibly urgent.
Right, because when people hear the story of the lion, the fox, and the ass, their immediate reaction is disgust. They say, this is a terrible guide for life. It's essentially telling me to kiss up to my abusive boss or get destroyed.
It sounds toxic.
But if we strip away our moral outrage, this fable perfectly describes the mechanics of navigating toxic corporate hierarchies or modern geopolitical realities. The ass's fatal mistake was assuming the rules of the game were based on his internal values of fairness, rather than the external reality of a lion's claws.
He didn't read the room.
He didn't read the room. The fox learning from the ass's demise is the ultimate lesson in corporate survival. If a new, highly narcissistic CEO takes over your company, a leader who demands total sycophantic loyalty, acting like the egalitarian ass and demanding your fair share in a board meeting, is career suicide.
So you have to adapt.
You have to know when you are dealing with a lion, and you must adjust your tactics accordingly until you can safely exit the room.
That makes sense for survival, but it feels so disempowering. Is the only option to be a sycophant?
Well, no. Aesop actually offers a brilliant counter-narrative in Fable 226, The Eagle and the Beetle.
Ah, this one's great.
This fable proves that even the infinitesimally weak have leverage if they are relentless.
So a hare is running for its life from an eagle. The hare sees a tiny beetle and begs it for protection. The beetle, full of courage, stands its ground and tells the eagle not to touch the hare.
A brave bug.
Very brave. The eagle looks at the tiny bug, laughs, sweeps it aside with a massive wing, and tears the hare to pieces right in front of it.
Just total disrespect.
Exactly. The beetle is absolutely enraged by the disrespect. It cannot fight the eagle in the air, so it resorts to asymmetric warfare. It tracks the eagle to her nest. When the eagle leaves to hunt, the beetle climbs up and rolls the eagle's eggs out of the nest, smashing them on the rocks below.
The ultimate revenge.
The eagle is devastated. She lays more eggs in a higher nest. The beetle finds them and smashes them again. The eagle becomes so paranoid and desperate that she flies all the way to Mount Olympus, goes to Jupiter, the king of the gods, and begs to lay her eggs directly in his lap for ultimate protection. Jupiter agrees.
But the beetle isn't done.
The beetle is relentless. It rolls a tiny ball of dirt, flies all the way up to the heavens, and drops the dirt right onto Jupiter's lap. Jupiter, surprised, stands up to shake the dirt off his robes, completely forgetting about the eggs. They smash on the marble floor of Olympus.
And the moral is incredible. The weak will sometimes find ways to avenge an insult, even upon the strong.
It is a flawless metaphor for modern asymmetric disruption.
Think about how a massive multi-billion-dollar corporation operates today. They are the eagle. They have armies of lawyers, billions in capital, and massive lobbying power. They assume they can crush a small supplier or ignore a defective product because the consumer is just a beetle.
But what happens? That one aggrieved consumer, that single beetle, gets on the internet.
Right. They write a viral thread. They organize a decentralized boycott. They leak an internal document to a journalist. The corporation tries to hide behind its PR firm, Jupiter's lap. But the beetle drops the dirt. The algorithm amplifies it, and the corporation's stock price tanks.
It's like one angry Redditor taking down a hedge fund.
Exactly. The fable teaches that power is not just about size, it is about vulnerability. The eagle has to sleep, the eagle has eggs. If you are the beetle, you don't fight the eagle in the sky, you target the eggs.
So how do we put this all together practically? How do we navigate a world of lions, foxes, eagles, and beetles without losing our souls or getting eaten?
The practice you need to adopt is what you could call establishing the ram's boundary.
From Fable 238.
Yes. The wolves want to eat the sheep, but the sheepdogs are too fierce. So the wolves send diplomats. They offer the sheep a permanent, lasting peace treaty. No more violence, no more bloodshed. There is only one tiny condition.
There's always a condition.
The sheep must hand over the sheepdogs to be executed as a sign of good faith. The majority of the sheep are exhausted by the constant vigilance. They just want peace. So they vote to accept the treaty. But an old, scarred ram steps forward and vetoes the deal. He says, "Are you out of your minds? Even with the dogs guarding us, the wolves still try to pick us off. If we give up our protectors for the promise of peace, we will be slaughtered by nightfall."
So the practical application for your life is this. You must identify the boundaries, the principles, or the literal protectors in your life that you must never negotiate away, no matter how much peace or harmony the other side promises.
But this is incredibly difficult for modern people to execute. The obstacle to growth here is our desperate, cinematic desire for the world to be fair. We watch movies where the good guys always win and the bad guys are punished. We desperately want the asp who divides the food equally to be rewarded with a promotion.
We want to believe the wolves are genuinely interested in a peace treaty.
Exactly. Accepting that the world frequently rewards the ruthless lion and the cunning fox is a bitter pill. Many people feel that simply acknowledging the reality of power dynamics is tantamount to endorsing them, so they choose to remain naive.
And this is where discernment reaches its peak. Because by reading, studying, and understanding these brutal fables, we are not endorsing the lion's tyranny. We are not saying you should aspire to be a ruthless dictator or that you should become a sycophantic, cowardly fox.
Aesop is not prescribing morality here. He is describing physics. He is mapping the world as it is, not as it should be.
The wisdom here mirrors that biblical proverb, "Be innocent as doves, but shrewd as snakes." You can hold on to your moral compass. You can strive for fairness, equity, and kindness in your personal dealings, but you must understand how power operates so you don't end up like the naive donkey.
You cannot survive a walk through the jungle if you operate under the delusion that you are in a petting zoo.
Well said. True discernment means protecting your high ideals by intimately understanding the low tactics of those who might wish to destroy them.
And the comparative insight here is staggering, because this entire section of Aesop is essentially a functional prequel to Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, which was written nearly 2,000 years later.
Oh, the Machiavelli connection.
Machiavelli shocked the Renaissance world when he wrote that a successful leader must possess the qualities of both a fox and a lion. He explicitly used those exact animals. He said a leader must be a fox in order to recognize traps and a lion in order to frighten off the wolves.
So he wasn't inventing some dark new philosophy. He was simply echoing the unvarnished biological truths of human nature that Aesop had already cataloged. The architecture of power, whether it's contested in an ancient sun-baked meadow or a modern glass-walled boardroom, has an incredibly consistent geometry.
Very consistent.
And that consistency is what brings us to the synthesis of this entire journey. We have traveled a massive distance today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by looking at the internal anxieties of our own discontent, our endless envy of the sleek coat and the blooming rose. We walked through the blinding, hyperreal mirrors of our own ego, watching the wolf admire his shadow and the bull cut off his horns for flattery.
Then the harsh realities of nature.
Right, we dug down into the stubborn, unyielding bedrock of our fundamental nature, wrestling with the terrifying reality of the scorpion and the ant. And finally, we zoomed out into the unforgiving macro hierarchies of external power, watching the donkey perish for fairness and the beetle wage war on the eagle.
What these 50 fables reveal is a stunning, undeniable continuity. Human nature has not changed.
Not at all.
The technology has evolved, the clothing is different, the algorithms are new. But the inner workings of the human animal, our struggles with jealousy, pride, habit, and leverage, are exactly the same today as they were thousands of years ago.
It is incredibly humbling. A laborer in a toga thousands of years ago was dealing with the exact same FOMO, the exact same toxic managers, and the exact same relational anxieties that you are dealing with on LinkedIn or in your group chats right now. We are not as uniquely modern as we like to think we are.
No, we are not.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative image to mull over. It's based on a fable we specifically saved for the very end.
The swan.
It's Fable 239, The Swan. In ancient mythology, there was a legend that a swan remains completely, entirely silent for its entire life. It never makes a sound. It only sings its one exquisitely beautiful song in the moments when it realizes it is about to die.
The swan song.
Exactly. In the fable, a wealthy man buys a swan, believing it will be a wonderful centerpiece for a banquet. He invites his friends over, puts the swan in the middle of the room, and tries to force it to sing for their entertainment.
But the swan stays totally silent.
Totally silent, the man is embarrassed, years go by, the swan lives silently on his estate. Finally, the swan grows old, feels the cold approach of death, and suddenly breaks into this incredibly sweet, complex, heartbreakingly beautiful song.
The man finally gets what he wanted, but
he's furious. The man hears the music from across the estate. He rushes out, sees the swan dying, and he realizes he wasted years waiting for this music, and the bird only decided to sing when it was too late for anyone to truly enjoy it.
it's a tragedy of timing.
It really is.
Yeah.
So here is my question for you, based on everything we've unpacked and explored today. Are you acting like the swan?
That's a great question.
Are you holding on to your voice, your talents, your true nature, waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect audience or the very end of your timeline to finally express who you really are?
Because we get so distracted.
We do. We spend so much of our lives worrying about the lions and the foxes. We spend decades trying to manage the size of our shadows. We exhaust ourselves envying the amaranth across the fence. And in doing all of that defensive maneuvering, we forget to actually sing.
We hold back the best part.
Yeah. So don't wait for your deathbed to finally take action on the wisdom you've learned. Don't let your best, most authentic song be a tragic realization of what you could have done, played out only as the curtain falls.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.